This is the 8th lecture in the neuroanatomy series on becoming an expert. I'm going to talk about the cells, all the things that make you become an expert or help you maintain your expertise. Going through all these cells, it's not only the neurons, but it's also these cells that support the neurons. So the topics are the neurons and the neuroglial cells. Those are the supporting cells. Those consist of the physiology of the expertise. And how fast you can perform something is due to myelination. We're going to learn about the cells that do that, and also about learning in general. So the only way to live is to grow. The only way to grow is to change. And the only way is to change is to learn. So it's a constant repetition of everything you learn every day allows you to get better and to grow. And these are the cells that make learning possible. This is a, microscopy, electron microscopy of nerve cells. And you can see these are the neurons, the cell body, the axons, and all these other cells in purple are the neuroglial cells, the supporting cells. The neurons, they only make up 10% of the brain tissue. There comes in more than two varieties, but the main varieties are the multipolar and the unipolar. And it gets confusing because when you look at this, the multipolar, it looks like it only has one thing coming out of it, but in fact, out of the cell body are all these dendritic projections that come out of the cell body. So all these things coming out of the cell body make this called a multipolar. The unipolar neuron, in contrast, only has one protrusion. So it's a unit, like a unicycle. Even though it's got these two axons, it's got only one coming out of its cell body. The unipolar cells are the ones that transmit sensory information to the central nervous system. So they're afferents. Afferent meaning advancing towards the central nervous system. The multipolar are the ones coming out or exiting. Efferent as in going away from, exiting away. These represent the somatic motor fibers. So multipolar, these cell bodies are usually within the central nervous system tissue and coming out, so they're exiting. And for instance, this will be a neuromuscular junction synapse. If you look at the spinal cord, this this person, if taking everything away except for their spinal cord, their bones, their spine, they're looking at you. So this is the anterior view of the spinal cord coming out. The vertebral bodies, you're looking at the vertebral bodies. So you're looking at, they're standing in front of you actually. And the dorsal root ganglia right here, these are nerves that are going towards, these are afferents, they're going toward the central nervous system. And the dorsal root ganglia is a representation of all these unipolar cell bodies that have all accumulated in this one area right here. And that creates this swelling, which is another term for ganglia, which is another term for swelling. The dorsal root ganglia contains the cell bodies of those unipolar cell neurons as they're going toward the central nervous system. And of course, these are all sensory. These anterior fibers, in contrast, these are coming away from the central nervous system. And these are the axons of the multipolar cells Their cell bodies are within the central nervous system. So this structure coming out right here are the axons coming out. And they are motor fibers. Okay, so when we were looking at that image, we saw the dorsal root ganglia, the multipolar cell neurons, and then there are a set of these bulges on either side going down the vertebra. And these are the vertebra, most likely these would represent the thoracic vertebra. So ganglia means just a swelling. And what is the other swelling next to the vertebra coming along in this chain? And there was your hint. This is the sympathetic chain ganglia. Comes out at the level, these afferents, these efferents coming out of the spinal cord, coming out of the thoracic and the lumbar area. And these are sympathetic, this is the sympathetic chain ganglia. And these ganglia, as we've talked about in prior lectures, these ganglia represent a multitude or a accumulation of synapses of coming from the spinal cord, synapsing here in the ganglia and going off to the effector sites. And the ganglia for sympathetics are close to the spinal cord so that they are ready for an all-out, all hands on deck. And the ganglia for parasympathetic are closer to the effector organs. So in this case, a ganglia is a group of synapses, where the dorsal root ganglia is a grouping of unipolar cell bodies. If you look at how everything is coming away from the central nervous system, the efferents coming away, these are multipolar cells coming away, and the somatic motor arm, there's a single neuron synapsing at the, or rather at the motor end plate at the muscles, whereas the autonomic nervous system is always having two neurons, this preganglionic fiber and this postganglionic fiber. And here where they synapse is the autonomic ganglia. So coming towards the sensory, and these are unipolar cell bodies, going away, or efferents, exiting, multipolar neurons. And then this motor arm, or this visceral arm, the autonomic nervous system, is the synapse going to the sympathetic or the parasympathetic. So if you look at this again, this person is standing looking towards you. The sympathetic chain ganglia goes all along the side of the vertebra. And all of these bulges are synapses between neurons. And the dorsal root ganglia represents the cell bodies, unipolar cell bodies. Next question: to get better at sports, playing a musical instrument, anything where you need to become an expert, you need to develop muscle memory. Is that true or false? Is there such a thing as muscle memory? And the answer is false. It doesn't have anything to do with your muscles so much as it has to do with your neurons. So the brain does not reside in your muscles, it's your nervous system. It's practice that creates what you call neural memory, not muscle memory. It's called it would be considered neural memory and not muscle memory. So this is pretty much what we're going to talk about today is the physiology of deliberate practice and how to create that neural memory. Practice increases myelination of those axons coming out of your out of these cell bodies. Notice these are multipolar neurons. The myelination is like a insulation system that surrounds these axons. And having myelination allows the impulse to travel faster, but also prevents signal fade. So that's why electric wire has insulation around it. So there are cells that are particularly designed at myelination. Quick review. What type of neuron is shown? Testing your short-term memory. Is it multipolar or unipolar? And the answer is multipolar. It's all those dendrites, all those things coming out of the cell body, which is represented right here, the cell body. The multipolar neuron carries a signal through the axon, going away, and it's this myelination that's surrounding it that allows for the signal to move faster and allow the signal or the electrical impulse not to fade. And the cells responsible for this are actually they're the same cells, but they're named differently depending on their location. In the peripheral nervous system, PNS, peripheral nervous system, it's laid down, myelination is laid down by the Schwann cells. In the central nervous system, the cells are called oligodendrocytes, laying down all this myelin. The way I remember it, and you come up with your own mnemonic, any type of memory aid, I think of oligodendrocytes, I think of oleomargarine. Used to be when they first came out with margarine, oleo was the term they used. And I think of the brain as this big fatty mass in your cranium. Oligodendrocytes are the cells that myelinate in the central nervous system. The cell name for within the peripheral nervous system are these Schwann cells. And I think of the company called Schwann's, and it delivers food to your door. And they always deliver it in these yellow trucks. So I think of the Schwann cells, peripheral nervous system. Now let's look at how you go from a novice to an expert. And the example I'm using is the novice driver. When you first start out, they're very jerky. They lack fluidity of their movements. So learning the skill of driving takes practice, and it's that myelination that creates a better driver. And the next example of a better driver is the casual driver. The actions are automatic. Sometimes you drive to work and then you don't even know how you get there. You don't know, you stopped at the stop sign, but everything becomes automatic. Your skills are what I wrote here as passable, and they don't drastically improve over time. Now, the next type of driver is the expert driver. And this is done through deliberate practice. This is a series of practice where the myelination becomes laid down and the skills are constantly being honed. And that is the way to become an expert. It's really concentrating and becoming a deliberate at your practice. So let's talk about what creates deliberate practice. Here's a cartoon. We need to stay focused on our marketing priorities and not get distracted by every shiny new, look, a squirrel. So focus is the number one thing of deliberate practice. Staying focused, staying consistent, calm, and the other thing is to stay slow. Myelination is a slow process. So when you practice slowly, and when you perform, you're going to be performing up to speed. So these are all the factors that create deliberate practice. This reminds me of when I have my violin lessons. When I'm trying to learn a new piece of music, I'll think about my teacher saying, okay, and after I play it a couple times slowly and accurately, my teacher will say, okay, now do it twice as fast. And as she's saying that to me, I think to myself, you know, I need time to myelate. I can't do it fast yet. Another example is Vladimir Horowitz, one of the most famous musicians, performers. And this is a quote from one of the authors of the book, who said, walking past his apartment in New York, it sounds as if a novice player is practicing. Practices slowly, deliberately, and very slow tempo. In slow practice, quote, slow practice is called fast practice. It gets you to where you want to go because you're taking time to myelinate. So taking a slow practice allows time for focus. You improve the weakest aspect, and tremendous focus is painful, tedious, but results in significant improvement over a short amount of time. And that is all on the value of slow and deliberate practice. And that's because you're laying down myelin, and myelin doesn't lay down quickly. So what would be your choice? What would be your choice of expertise? Some of these examples. Okay, let's go on to the next cell, the neuroglial cell, the astrocyte, one of my favorite cells. It is the most common neuroglial cell. It is responsible for creating the blood-brain barrier. And I know you've heard the blood-brain barrier. That is the cell that straps itself across blood vessels only within the brain. These are only cells located within the brain, and they prevent any leakage of pathogens that have somehow gotten into your bloodstream, and allows them from being leaked from the plasma of your blood into the neural tissues in your brain. This is a depiction of what it would look like, how these cells lay themselves around the blood vessels that are coursing through your brain. And these neuroglial cells kind of patch themselves around these blood vessels, not allowing things to pass into the blood vessel, into the parenchyma or the tissues of the brain. In particular, you don't want any swelling of your brain. Remember, the cranium doesn't expand. So this also prevents a lot of swelling, so you prevent brain swelling. Okay, true or false question. The brain uses the same lymphatic system as the body. The lymphatic system is the system of vessels that take away any extra substances that have gone into your subcutaneous tissues all throughout your body. True or false? Same lymphatic system. The answer is false. So if you look at the lymphatic system, this is a depiction of the lymphatic system. Notice how it goes all throughout the body. These are actually lymphatic vessels. These are not arteries or veins. These are lymphatics. This right here is the spleen. And notice how the lymphatic system is surrounding the skull, but there is no lymphatic system within the brain itself. So there's no need for a lymphatic system in the central nervous system because the brain capillaries are not leaking. Instead, the brain has what's called a glymphatic system, where the cerebral spinal fluid diffuses through brain tissue during sleep that removes the toxin, and then it dumps into the venous system, eventually gets cleaned up by the liver and spleen. And the cells that are responsible for helping with this are these ependymal cells. These are the sweeper cells. They look like the broom, the brushes of a broom, the ependymal cells. And they sweep this cerebral spinal fluid through your ventricles, spinal fluid, spinal canal, and clean up all the metabolic waste. And this, we talked about the meninges and the ventricles and the spinal fluid in an earlier chapter. So in contrast, within your body capillaries do leak. They do not have astrocytes surrounding them. This allows for your tissues to expand. So when you get hit or a bump or you get a cut, it allows for white blood cells to get through these capillary pores and start attacking the pathogens. And the lymphatic vessels, as represented right here, lymphatic vessels come in this capillary network, and they clean up all this debris, all this plasma, everything that gets through. So they pick up waste and fluids, take it back into the venous circulation, and then gets all cleaned up by the liver and kidneys and spleen. So here's a case scenario. This is a 40-year-old man with a rapidly growing brain tumor. Notice that there's swelling around the tumor. He's got a shift of his ventricles, and notice how we've lost the symmetry. This is his one of his lateral ventricles. The other is completely obliterated by this swelling from the brain tumor. Why do you think there is so much swelling around the brain tumor? And this is represented by this tumor and all these rapidly growing blood vessels trying to supply this brain tumor. A, the new vessels don't have astrocytes, or B, the new vessels don't have oligodendrocytes. And the correct answer is the new vessels are growing at such a rate that the astrocytes haven't enveloped them. That's why having a brain tumor is so dangerous, and why the brain tumors swell and create high intracranial pressure. The way I remember astrocytes, I remember the Jetsons. They had a dog named Astro, the dog that protected the family. Astrocytes. In cancer, a rapid growth of blood vessels is called angiogenesis. So these abnormal vessels are growing at such a rate that astrocytes are not there to protect that blood-brain barrier, and eventually they get all this swelling and leakage of fluids. So these cells that create expertise provide protection. We have the neuroglial cells, support cells. 90% of your brain is these support cells. The myelination are the Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system, oligodendrocytes in the central. The astrocytes, Astro, the dog that protects the Jetsons, they're protecting the blood-brain barrier. And then the other cell that we didn't talk about are these microglial cells. And they're these tiny little cells right here that kind of take the place of white blood cells for the brain. And they're picking up anything that the astrocytes actually accidentally let go. And then, of course, the ependymal cells, the sweeper cells looking like brooms. Myelination happens with repetition, calm, slow, focused practice. And then for those over the age of 50, you can't just stop after you think you've learned it. You have to continue practicing, because after the age of 50, myelin slowly begins to unwind. If you want to look at any other resources, these are some of my favorite books on talent, brain roles, Peak, Anders Ericsson, years of research. The PDF will be included on a within the notes at the end of this presentation and posted on the video information. Any questions, please add to comments. And please subscribe. Thanks.